Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the Telegraph's comment editor Annabel Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Well, now let's see what is on some of those front pages we'll be discussing. Well, the Eye claims talks could soon lead to the Chancellor U-turning on the government's plan to scrap winter fuel payments to around 9 million pensioners. The Daily Express also leads on this story, claiming that Sir Keir Starmer has opened the door on talks to restore winter fuel payments for OAPs. The Daily Mirror also leads on the winter fuel payment story, saying that Keir Starmer hasn't ruled out a change to the controversial policy. However, Sky News understands that Downing Street has denied these claims. The Times, meanwhile, leads on Starmer's Brexit reset deal and his promise that the youth mobility scheme would not equal a return to free movement. The Guardian's front page also focuses on this story, with Rachel Reeves's claim that the scheme will improve UK-EU relations. The Chancellor's workload also features on the front of the Telegraph. This time, the pressure she's apparently facing to cut the amount that people can put into an individual savings account without being taxed. The Mail hears that the Department of Transport is considering a proposal to increase parking fines by as much as 75%. The FT reports that the board of Novo, which makes the weight loss drug Ozempic, has sacked the company's chief executive as it faces increasing competition from rivals. And finally, the Daily Star's front page looks at the 3 p.m. beer garden break law sought by some pub bosses across the UK. Well, we're joined tonight by Zoe Williams and Annabel Denham. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with a story that was actually on 3 of the front pages. Let's just look at the Eye here, and it's the winter fuel cut. This such a controversial move when it was made, of course, I think the first properly controversial move made by the government. Isabel, why don't you start us on it? What is it exactly that we're hearing?
Sure. So it was last summer that the Labour government announced that it would be cutting the universal winter fuel payment, which goes to around, or used to go to around 10 million pensioners. That took effect in April this year, but it's been extremely unpopular, really, with both the left and right, as you know, particularly as reflected on the cover of the Daily Express, saying finally we're seeing some sense in the suggestion, at least, that Labour might U-turn on the decision to reverse that cut to the payment. And you know, I think a lot of Labour backbenchers have warned that, you know, that it's stoking rebellion. Most Labour MPs are not coming into government to cut benefits. They want to increase the welfare state, grow the welfare state, rather than try and shrink it. So it's now the suggestion, really, that Keir Starmer perhaps is buckling to some of that pressure.
It's actually classic bad politics, this, because they didn't need to. They could have done it much more in a much more sophisticated way. Cut it for the wealthiest pensioners. What they would have done in that case is they would have brought out a massive kind of sense of blitz spirit among some wealthy pensioners, because I know loads of pensioners who always said we don't need it. Instead, what they did was they caught loads and loads of pensioners who actually couldn't afford it in the dragnet of the cut. They got loads of people who were on carers allowance and had their carers allowance cut because they'd become pensioners and then got their got their winter fuel payment cut. So it was like a really big difference for a lot of households, especially in the younger end of the pensioner bracket. It was the difference between, you know, being able to go away one time in a year and never going away. So I was astonished at how bad it was economically, because they could have clawed back almost as much money without catching so many people in the net. But as Annabel says, what that did was unite the left and right, because I know nobody on the Guardian who was in favour of this, nobody on the Telegraph. The kind of charities for older people are incredibly effective, and once they've got the bit between their teeth, they never, ever, ever let go. So, you know, this was a U-turn waiting to happen, but now it looks really, really bad. A, because Number 10 is still denying this, by the way, but exactly, 3 papers have it. So, of course, it's going to happen. How did they get it otherwise? And B, because it looks like they've caved to the local elections. So what have they done since those local elections? They've distressed everybody, left to right. with the immigration rhetoric, and now they've gone back on the one policy that they thought they were proud of.
Yeah, also the eye, of course, is now saying that it's going to be a partial U-turn, which isn't going to win Labour a single vote. They're not going to bring anybody back to their cause. Instead, as Zoe said, people are going to feel very cynical about it. The suggestion will be that they're only U-turning because they lost that Runcorn by-election. They were pummeled at the local elections a few weeks ago, and that's what's motivating Keir Starmer to do this, rather than him being actually, on reflection, ideologically opposed to it.
Let's look at the front page of the Daily Express, again, same story, but their title, Finally Some Sense. Door opens on fuel pay U-turn, Zoe.
The problem with, sorry, I'm going in like I would have had all the answers, but I think I actually would have had all the answers if they just asked me. But the problem with the Daily Express having a headline like this is that this was the voice or the idea they were chasing, is, the kind of newspaper that speaks to the voters who deserted them in Runcorn, saying finally some sense. But that headline is going to last 12 hours, and the day after tomorrow, they're going to be calling them yet again the worst government that anybody's ever seen. So chasing that voice isn't working for them, will never work for them. And if they wake up tomorrow and say, oh, great, the Express is on our side, they're dreaming.
Let's move to another story here in the Daily Telegraph, sort of linked, economic and trying to boost growth. Hands off ISAs, banks tell Rachel Reeves. Annabelle, talk us through this one.
So this is the suggestion that Rachel Reeves is looking at overhauling ISAs and reducing the amount that people can put specifically into cash ISAs. So at the moment, the limit is £20,000 that you will get tax-free on any interest or returns if you're investing in stocks and shares ISA, or stocks and shares, in fact. So now there's this suggestion that she's going to reduce the amount that you can put in cash, and the idea really is that the Chancellor is trying to encourage people to invest more, specifically to invest more in British companies. Now, that might be all right if you're somebody who's just starting out in their career and is happy, assuming that you have some savings, then you can have a long-term view here. But unfortunately, if you're coming towards the end of your life and you're a pensioner and you're not able, unfortunately, to have that longer-term view, then it may not really be an option for you. So it does again look as though the Labour Party is clobbering pensioners. And here we're reporting that banks, among them HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds Bank, the Building Societies Association and others are warning the Chancellor against this move, saying it's going to, leave savers and pensioners facing higher bills, and they are circumspect as to whether it's actually going to deliver growth.
The thing is, I get you guys being against this move, and I get the banks being against it, but the Labour Party exists in order to put the interests of some people in society above the interests of the people who've got £20,000 a year to save. And if they had any courage, they'd be able to come out and say this. But they don't have any courage, so they're going to be caught on the hop again. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if Reeves didn't go back on it, because, £20,000 to £4,000 a year is quite a cut. And I can really see her being kind of shambled out of it, rather than coming out and saying, well, look, it doesn't. That's a lot of money. If you've got it, then maybe use it more usefully.
It does emphasise, though, the pressure that the Chancellor is on right now still.
But she's only under this kind of pressure because she doesn't have a course. She's not steering her course. And if she really knew where she wanted to go, rather than being buffeted by, oh my gosh, we've discovered a new pile of debt, oh my gosh, growth isn't happening the way we wanted it to, because that's not how growth works. If she actually had a kind of theory of what she wanted in terms of kind of principles, rather than just money in, money out, then it wouldn't feel like she was being buffeted from every side.
Well, I think it's fair to say that her fiscal headroom has shrunk significantly. Of course, when Labour came into power, they were insistent that they had inherited the worst set of economic circumstances of any government in living memory, and they really played up this £22 billion black hole that they had been bequeathed by the previous Conservative administration. I think because of the fiscal rules that the Chancellor set herself, she is limited in terms of what she can do. on tax and spend and borrowing. However, Zoe's absolutely right that there does seem to be this kind of ideological gap in the Labour Party where it's not clear what it is they're trying to achieve.
But so what should she do?
I certainly don't think that she should be disincentivising people from saving, however wealthy they may be. And I can imagine, just specifically with this issue, that it'll lead to some kind of mis-selling problems down the line, because no matter how much you try and regulate for these things, you always end up with those sorts of problems. I mean, I'm a free marketeer, so I'd like to see the Chancellor cut government spending significantly, which she's clearly going to struggle to do. You know, we talked about just that £5 billion saving with the winter fuel allowance, but radically trim the size of the state and then move towards lowering taxes so that you get growth.
There's a really good case for simply taxing rich people. I mean, that's the case. If you want a welfare state and you want public services, then you do need to tax somebody. You can't claw it all back from taking it away from people on benefits. It just isn't going to work.
We do tax the rich already. I mean, the top 1% pay 30% of all income.
But that's because they own much more of the wealth of this nation than they should own. And actually, we'd be much better off taxing their wealth rather than their income, because their income is really kind of the much less relevant part of their overall
taxes
portfolio.
have been reversed everywhere that they've been tried, because the administrative costs always outweigh the amount that's brought in revenue. So I don't think we've ever, across any country in the world, have created a mechanism through which we can effectively tax wealth.
But that's not
and it causes, we know how many millionaires are leaving the country now. We had the biggest exodus in 2024 of any country apart from communist China.
Look, you don't get to make tax policy on, some people have tried it some ways and it didn't work. You need to do it on principle and say, how redistributive do you want to be? Now, at the moment, there's a huge amount of appetite for, the kind of norm is no redistribution at all. But perfectly decent and livable societies have been built on a lot of redistribution.
Well, I mean, we have a huge amount of redistribution.
We don't really. We have redistribution between classes who actually aren't that different, while the wealthy really pay very little tax, very little tax.
But I think I would also rather, I'd rather grow the pie than just redistribute and squabble over
but you
what
will
we
grow
have.
the pie
and
faster.
I would rather have a society where the poorest living standards are improved, even if it's a more unequal society.
No, but that's not what happens when it's really unequal.
Well, let's find the point that maybe you two could agree on. Daily Mail parking fines, which apparently could rocket by a pretty staggering 75%. As someone who often gets parking fines, this is personally quite worrying. But what do you think of it?
It's really funny, this, because it says they'd be treated more harshly than shoplifters. Well, they are de facto treated more harshly than shoplifters, because most shoplifters aren't caught. And most people who park wrongly are caught. I mean, it's astronomical how fast you get caught parking in the wrong place. So I think that's a poor comparison by the Daily Mail. But the reason it amused me, this story, is just how few friends the Labour Party has. It's like drivers don't like them anyway, and now they're going to like them less. But non-drivers, kind of cyclists, don't like them because of all the kind of havering around the net zero stuff, the Tony Blair interventions, the lack of dynamism and purpose around climate. No, and that is just on that one small issue between kind of within transport. Everything you choose, from free marketeers to lefties, none of us can stand it.
No, I think this is going to be a widely unpopular measure. It's very easy to forget, particularly if you live in London, how many journeys are made by car in this country. Overwhelmingly, people are getting into their vehicles to get to work, to get to the shops, to take their children to school. And I did read that in 2022, British drivers paid £1.2 billion, apparently, overall in parking fines. And to hear that figure is going to go up.
Not quite. All right, Annabelle, Zoe, stay with us. Coming up, we're going to look at another story. This is the government being in discussion about a closer relationship with the EU. Should that be welcomed, or is it a betrayal of Brexit? We'll be discussing that next. Stay with us.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here They don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything. It's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me in the studio, Zoe Williams and Annabelle Denham. Let's go to the front page of the Times, a story that I think we'll be talking about a lot next week. Well, we've been talking about it for a long time anyway. Possible Brexit reset, Starmer hailing it. And this particular issue is the youth mobility scheme. So basically allowing younger people from the EU and in the UK to be able to travel. Annabelle, let me start with you. Tell us about the story and what you think of it.
Sure. Well, this obviously comes ahead of next week's much lauded, much trailed EU-UK Brexit summit, being described as some sort of reset of our relations with the European Union post-Brexit. And specifically on the cover of the Times, as you say, the youth mobility scheme. Now, this is something that Keir Starmer was absolutely insistent Labour Party wouldn't be bringing in, perhaps for fear that Brexiteers, the public, even non-Brexiteers, Remainers who tired of the Brexit wars, would just be in a state of complete despair at the suggestion that he was opening the door to perhaps free movement down the line. Now, as you say, it's for 18 to 30-year-olds. It's for them to come for up to 2 years to Britain, and indeed for Brits to go to the European Union, to travel, to live, to work, to study. But you just wonder whether the goalposts will perhaps be moved down the line, and whether, as insistent as the Labour Party might be that this isn't free movement, we're going to end up with something that looks very similar to it.
Zoe, considering what we heard from the Prime Minister about migration, this week, Why do you think he's so insistent on this?
I've got so many complaints about this. It's just bursting
By all means,
out
air
of
them.
me. Well, so when Labour first got in last year, Ursula von der Leyen said, you know, you could signal that you're a new era of people who talk sense by opening your ears to the youth mobility scheme. Everybody said absolutely no way, for exactly the reason you described. You know, they just didn't want Brexiteers on their case. But actually, it felt a bit like they were saying to Remainers, you know, just take your medicine. You might have voted for us. You might have campaigned for us. You might be right behind us. But we're not here for you. Yeah. And it was astronomically
And then those are
disappointing.
pictures of the leaders meeting. I mean, there Macron, the Albanian Prime Minister. We saw Keir Starmer a little earlier, Ursula von der Leyen, Giorgia Meloni. That's a meeting in Tirana a little bit earlier today.
Eddie Rama, head and shoulders above.
Yes, he kneeled in front of, I think, the Italian Prime Minister. Literally, he is very, very, very tall.
And I think in the context of the migration rhetoric, which caused so much distress last week, or this week was it? It's been to then say the youth mobility scheme is fine, but other immigrants make an island of strangers. Yeah. Well, it just sounds like he's all over the place.
So just very briefly then, let's look at this headline in The Guardian then. Yeah. Same story. UK on path to deeper EU relationship, according to Rachel Reeves.
I mean, what I thought was funny about this is it reads like Rachel Reeves thinks only Guardian readers read The Guardian, like nobody else will see it. But everybody's going to see it. And not only does it not have much meat on its bones in terms of kind of actual policy, but it again goes against all her language and rhetoric, all her promises, and makes her look like a weather vane. No, which is the one that moves with the weather rather than setting. It makes her look like a weather vane. Yeah, she's moving with the weather, and it makes her look like a slow weather vane, which is the worst kind of weather vane.
Well, I mean, I think people are, as Zoe says, it won't just be Guardian readers who will see the splash, and they will feel as though Labour are betraying, if not the letter of Brexit, then the spirit of Brexit. And they have already proven themselves to be pretty poor negotiators. Look at what happened with the surrender of the Chagos Islands, and you can well imagine that they will give up fishing. They'll allow more EU access to our fishing waters. That will tie ourselves into all sorts of permanent commitments on defence, buying French, say, rather than Japanese or Canadians for more money, and these will be agreements that will be very difficult for them to backtrack from. And you have to just wonder what the overarching goal is for Labour. Is it just that there are so many Remainers there? Of course, Keir Starmer did campaign for a second referendum, and it's something that they're just not able to let go of, or do they think there is a contingent, coalition of voters out there who they'll win over?
Be talking about it for the rest of the week.
For the rest of time.
For the rest of time, but certainly next week. Time for one last story, just a minute, on the front of the Daily Star. So 3 p.m. beer garden break. So pub bosses, unsurprisingly, want to legalise some kind of beer break when it's sunny. Zoe.
I mean, the thing is, it was the most extraordinary. The first week I ever started work, it was April, but it was a really hot April, and I saw 3 workmen buy a pint each in their lunch break. But I don't think it was their first pint. And the foreman came into the pub and said, "You either have to down it in one, or you have to leave it, and because otherwise you're going to lose your job." And all 3 of them just went.
Unsurprisingly.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And I really took that as a role model.
Annabelle, here it says, though, it starts at 20 degrees, which isn't very warm.
No, I mean, I think we have quite a cool climate here in the UK, but nevertheless, the mercury does rise above 20 degrees reasonably often. So I think that they might face some resistance when it comes to actually making this policy.
So what do you think the temperature should be to have a kind of mandatory 3 p.m?
I can't remember what the rule is where you don't need to work if the temperature gets over a certain number. Maybe 30.
We're going to have to leave it there because we're running out of time. Zoe Annabelle will chat about it more in the next hour.